All right, hello, hey there, everybody. It's me, Chris Herman, here for another episode of On Deck. Today's another solo episode, and for all of you that watched episode 89, where I talked about the best albums of 1989, I know you're eagerly awaiting this episode, which I'm filming back-to-back like 5 minutes apart, not even. But today, episode 90, yes it is, episode 90 of On Deck, can you believe that? Is the best albums of the early 90s, okay? That's going to be today's topic. I ran out of my cards, so now we're just on, on letterhead here to introduce the show. So for those of you that watched episode 89, you know, I kind of ran through one website's listings of what they thought were the best albums of 1989, and I really only did that as a precursor because I thought, episode 89 should have been about 89, and this is episode 90, and this is what I really wanted to talk about was music of the early 90s. So why would I want to talk about that? Well, it's funny, I have a band. I'm in a band with two other guys, John Sheffield and Jeffrey Carter, both of whom have been on the podcast, and both of whom also work in the advertising and marketing space. And years ago, like 25 years ago, 20-some years ago, a long time, we all met at Zimmerman, and we started playing music together then, and we're playing music together again. And so we started rehearsing 6 to 9 months ago. We actually just had a party here at the agency. It was a lot of fun. And the core of what we play is primarily 90s rock. And it's funny because even though I was in college in the early 90s and I like a lot of 90s rock bands and all that stuff, I don't know. It only took until like the last few days that I've been realizing how great the music was and still is, because so many bands are still performing, of the bands that came out in the early 90s. Like, it's insane how much killer music came out. And so I've been revisiting a lot of it in the last week or so, and so I thought it would be fun to just go through and talk about some of the albums that came out, bands that came out, and albums that came out in the early 90s. Because to me, there's the early 90s, and then the dynamic changes. But there was tons of great rock music and hip hop music that came out in the 90s, of which I loved a lot. And so I just wanted to talk about it because I'm realizing, like, the early 90s, particularly for rock, actually for hip hop as well too, but I'm going to speak a little bit more about rock and alternative rock, like the amount of like powerhouse bands that came out during that time. I mean, you could almost compare it to the 60s with how much incredible music came out during this period of time. And now that I'm of the age where it's like that's probably going to be identified as like the music of my generation to some degree, I'm reconnecting with it and really realizing how amazing it is. So, excuse me, a sip of coffee. I want to go through, some of this stuff. So I'm going to bounce from a bunch of different websites. We're going to go year by year here a little bit. And again, I'm no audiophile. I'm not going to hit everything. There's going to be a lot of stuff that either seems obscure or really isn't obscure that I'm not as familiar with, so I might blow past it. So I'm not going to do I'm not doing any countdown stuff here. I'm just going to scroll through a few lists and hit on some of the highlights. So according to Paste Magazine, again, Paste with a P, pastemagazine.com. Don't know who they are. Don't know if they're an authority or not, but the best 25 albums of 1990. According to them, number 25 is the Pixies, Bossa Nova. All right, so I think I mentioned this in a previous episode or in the last one. I should know way more about the Pixies. I feel like, if you're into rock and if you're into alternative and you're supposed to know about them, and I don't know shit about the Pixies. I really don't. So I'm going to blow by that. Number 24, Living Colour, Time's Up. This was their follow-up album to Vivid, which came out in 1988. And I don't want to talk much about Time's Up because Vivid, to me, like, that album is just mind-blowing amazing, but it doesn't fit into our 90s thing, even though I listened to a lot in the 90s. But if you haven't checked out Living Colour, and particularly their intro album, Vivid, freaking amazing. I'm just going to scroll through. Okay, here, number 22, Depeche Mode, Violator. Okay, so this had Personal Jesus on it, Policy of Truth. These are songs that we all know. I don't know this album that well, but definitely cool stuff there. You like the way I said that? Cool stuff. I'm just going to keep blowing on. Listen, I'm going to touch on whatever I want to touch on. According to them, number 20, Ice Cube, America's Most Wanted. Now, I didn't listen to this album that much, but I think his next album was Death Certificate, and I listened to that a ton, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Let's see, The Breeders, The Replacements. Okay, The Black Crowes, Shake Your Money Maker. Now, hey, little thing, let me light your candle, cause I'm however that goes. I'm pretty sure that's on this album. And if it's not, then I'm going to sound like a real ding-dong. But nevertheless, I actually just downloaded this album because I've never had it, and I've never listened to it all the way through. And I'm actually really looking forward to listening to this album again. Not again, because I haven't listened to the first thing. I think I just know a few songs. But Black Crowes were like one of the few bands like through the 90s that were sort of unapologetically retro, and vintage, and definitely embraced more of that Rolling Stonesy, Beatlesy kind of sound. And they totally hung there through the 90s. So I'm really looking forward to listening to that. Let's see, Sinead O'Connor. Okay, Eric B. and Rakim. Don't know a lot about this album, but definitely know who they are. Alice in Chains, Facelift. That's before Dirt. So I'm just going to keep rolling until I hit something that really hits me. Okay, so here we go. Number 8. So in the previous episode, I talked about De La Soul. Here, according to this website, number 8, A Tribe Called Quest, People's Instinctive Travels and the Paths of Rhythm. So this was A Tribe Called Quest's debut album, according to my knowledge, and it's not my favorite Tribe Called Quest. The one I remember the most off of this is I Left My Wallet in El Segundo, because I had a roommate, Mr. Tom King, in college, and he loved that track, and we listened to this album a lot. But this is what really opened the door for me for A Tribe Called Quest, and I will say that A Tribe Called Quest are hands down my favorite hip-hop band, group, whatever you want to call them, without a doubt. But I'm a low-end Theory guy, or Midnight Marauders. But, this album started it all. Here we go, number 7, Fugazi, Repeater. The follow-up to Fugazi, 13 Songs, which came out in 1989. Just another killer album from Fugazi. And here we go. So this is like the first album. This is number 4. This, to me, is like the first album that really begins what I would call 90s rock, even though their first album came out in 89. This album, this is Jane's Addiction, Ritual de lo Habitual. Oh man, do I love this record. Just freaking great. Dave Navarro, I think, is a very underrated guitar player. And I love like his lush stuff, particularly on the second half of the album, which starts with 3 Days. Like the first album is like kind of their sort of like funky, gritty, grindy kind of rock stuff. First track is Stop, which is an awesome track. I think Been Caught Stealing's on here, which I really, that song never did much to me. But when you get into the second half of this track or this album, 3 Days, Then She Did, just beautiful, long form, very trippy rock and roll. And I mean, this album is not only important, in my opinion, for 90s rock and moving forward, but it was around the time that this album came out that Perry Farrell created Lollapalooza, which, still goes on to this day. At the time, in 90, 91, whenever the first one was, I mean, it was like there was nothing else like it. It brought together all of these killer 90s bands. And for my time in that time of my life, like that was the showcase for so much cool music. And I look at this album as really being a foundational element of that movement. So Jane's Addiction, Ritual de lo Habitual. Sonic Youth, listen to them a little bit. Not a huge fan, but not a fan. I understand and appreciate what they're about. Here we go. Number 2, Public Enemy, Fear of a Black Planet. Now, this album was killer, still is. So powerful, so noisy. I think their production crew was called the Bomb Squad for Chuck D and Flava Flav. But, I mean, this was like my first real introduction into like really powerful, and the power of hip hop and what it could do from a message perspective. I know it was very militant. I know it was very pro-African American, and I know a lot of people would say, would have things to say about it, but I really, Welcome to the Terror Dome was a great song. I mean, there's so many great tracks on this album, and they're loud and they're noisy and they're just in your face. Freaking killer album. And then according to this site, number 1, Cocteau Twins. I can't tell you anything about that. But so that's 1990, right? So we're starting to get a little bit of a feel for what's about to happen. But I think most of us know that it was 1991, which was really the year that just blasted it all open. So in this one, I'm going to go backwards. Is this the same website, pastemagazine.com? Yeah, again, I don't know how Paste Magazine is. But I can't say that I disagree with a lot of their choices. So you can't talk about 90s rock, you can't talk about 90s music, and you can't talk about like the earth-shattering difference of basically almost everything that was before and everything was after without talking about clearly the number 1 album of 1991, which was Nirvana, Nevermind. I think anybody of my generation would probably be able to say they know exactly where they were the first time they heard Smells Like Teen Spirit. I know where I was. I was in Boulder, Colorado with some friends at some club downstairs. We were going to see a buddy's band. I don't remember who the band was. The club had a huge sound system, and they put on Smells Like Teen Spirit. And I remember my friend looking at me, he's like, this is the new Nirvana song. And like so many other people, when that song kicked in, I was like, holy shit, this is fucking awesome, right? I had not heard anything up until that point that had like the sheer power and sound and just aggressiveness that most of the New York hardcore bands that I really like to listen to. And I'm not comparing the two, but like I was really into like heavy, hard-hitting music. And that song came on, it was like, whoa, this is something I can really dig. And of course, they went on to change the world, and everybody knows the story. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I'm a huge Nevermind fan. Like, I don't listen to this album that much. There's tracks on here that I really like, but I've never been like a guy who listens to a lot of Nirvana. I don't know why. I just like, there's punk and hardcore bands that I like better, and there's 90s rock bands that I like better. But without a doubt, there's no way to even hit into the 90s without talking about this album, the importance of it, and how great it is, without a doubt. Number 2, My Bloody Valentine, Loveless. Now, this is an album I haven't listened to it enough, so I can't comment on it well. But I know this is one of those things that, like, if you're a real music and real, like, 90s rock fan, like, I should know way more about this. But I'm going to skip over it. Here we go. Number 3, Tribe Called Quest, Low End Theory, my ultimate favorite hip-hop album without a doubt. I mean, I can probably rap along every word, which I think you'd probably all find very amusing or even silly or, quite frankly, embarrassing. But I don't know that there's a song on this album that I don't know every word to. I just love this record. Tribe Called Quest, A Low End Theory. U2, Achtung Baby, right? Another, bigger rock band. I wouldn't identify them as 90s rock, but this was a big album for U2 and a big shift in their sound away from some of that older style and into a little bit more progressive and edgy and a little bit of an industrial techno kind of flavor going in there. So huge album. Here's another one. Okay, number 5, Pearl Jam, 10. I just listened to this album yesterday again for the first time in a long time. It is killer. I mean, everybody knows, the song Jeremy, but I mean, Alive is killer. Porch is killer. And, there's just Even Flow, Black. There's so many great songs on this record. So many. I think by far it's my favorite Pearl Jam album. And, here you go. You got Nirvana hitting it big out of the gates here. You got Pearl Jam coming out huge. REM, Out of Time. What do we got on here? Shiny Happy People. I was never a huge REM fan. Like, don't have anything against them. Not a huge fan. Next one, De La Soul Is Dead. So this is the follow-up to 3 Feet High and Rising. Kind of a bookend type of album to A Tribe Called Quest. Low End Theory. We listened to this one a lot. So you had a lot of interesting things. Like you've got hip-hop really starting to develop, and you've got alternative rock starting to develop. Again, huge stuff here. Here's another one. Soundgarden, Bad Motorfinger. Freaking killer album. I think it opens with Rusty Cage and then into Outshined. I mean, how much... Like, Soundgarden were so big and so powerful, and their playing was amazing and like sludgy, but Chris Cornell's vocals, incredible. Probably one of, if not the best rock vocalist of all times. Boom. In this lump. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden. Okay? Another album by the Pixies that I should totally know more about, but I don't, so I'm going to blow over it. What do we got? Matthew Sweet Girlfriend, Teenage Fan Club, Slint. I don't know. I'm not going to say much about these albums here. Here we go. Here's another big one that really hit me. And I think these all came out like 3 or 4 or 5 of these records came out like in September in 1991. So here you go. Red Hot. And listen, you know, if you're a super duper music fan, you're going to probably want to give me shit for skipping over some of the stuff that I did, and I'm kind of hitting on the big stuff. But the big stuff is what I dig here. Red Hot Chili Peppers, Blood Sugar, Sex Magic. This album is freaking awesome. I love it. I can listen to start to finish over and over and over and over again. Chad Smith is an amazing drummer. I love his style. I love his sound. Flea, what can you say? Flea is Flea. And this is the first album that John Frusciante really got to stretch out and start to put his stamp on this band. And, you know, he's back with the band again for the 3rd time. This album was the first one produced by Rick Rubin. I'm pretty sure they rented a mansion up in the Hollywood Hills and just lived there and recorded this album. It's freaking great. It's punky, it's funky, it's rock, it's got everything to it. I totally dig this album. So here we got we've got Nirvana, Nevermind. We got Pearl Jam 10. We got Soundgarden, Bad Motorfinger. We got Red Hot Chili Peppers, Blood Sugar, Sex Magic, plus a lot of other cool indie stuff that I don't know as well. But, I mean, when you're talking about, like, what came out during that period of time, here's another one, Primus. Now, Primus were a weird band. This was their album, Sailing the Seas of Cheese. Awesome album. Really, 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 really cool. Les Claypool came out of nowhere with this really unique bass style. And I got to tell you, I listened to this album a lot. Now, it's been a while since I listened to it. I'm probably going to put it on as I drive home from work today. But, you know, I just can't say enough about this stuff that came out in the early 90s. Like, oh, here we go, number 23. All right, now not a new band, but Metallica's Black Album came out in 91 as well, too. I mean, how many hits came off of that album? And that album absolutely sealed their legacy moving forward as the biggest, if not best, and longest, certainly now, longest lasting metal band, period. I mean, so, like, just incredible stuff coming out during this period of time. And I don't even think, oh, here we go. And number 26, Fugazi, Steady Diet of Nothing, another killer album. You know, back to back to back to back with Fugazi, one after the other. Now, I thought I was going to go, let's just dig in a little bit more. Like, I don't want this to be just like a countdown kind of thing. But what I'm trying to identify to all of you in my generation is, number one, I'm hoping that in listening to this, that you're going to go back and listen to some of this music, because it's easy to move on and, you know, and just check out different stuff. But I mean, for those of us particularly that were in our late teens, early 20s or whatever, 20s during this period of time, like, it's just, I don't know if there's another time in recent years in the 2000s or 2010s or even now where you just had so many killer musical acts coming out. I mean, just like Jane's Addiction, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Public Enemy, Tribe Called Quest, Living Colour. I mean, and you still had some of the big ones, you know, out there. You know, Prince was still out putting out music. Neil Young still putting out music. So that's 91. Let's take a look at 92 real quick. I'm gonna try and go a little bit faster because I'm really just talking to myself here, but maybe. Okay, here we go. 1992, according to this website, youdiscovermusic.com. What was the number one album of 1992? And it's another hip-hop powerhouse, and that would be Dr. Dre, The Chronic. And who could argue with that? I mean, listen, as an Anglo male in the early 90s, starting to be really introduced to the world of hip hop through Public Enemy, through Tribe Called Quest, through De La Soul. That was all one thing, but then Dr. Dre comes along, and I realized Dre and Eazy, they were all in the NWA, okay? But when The Chronic came out, this was like a massive crossover success. I can't tell you how many Anglo boys and girls were just digging this, and we all still are, because they just played the Super Bowl, and how many of us were just going nuts at halftime listening to these songs. I mean, Dr. Dre, The Chronic, never tire of that. Never tire of that. Okay, here we go. Here's another one. Rage Against the Machine comes out in 92. I mean, that was when I heard Rage Against the Machine, I was just like, oh man, I loved it. Love that band. Love the band. Just killer music. I'm going to go. Here we go. Alice in Chains, Dirt. Beastie Boys, Check Your Head. Pavement, Slanted and Enchanted. Let's see. Blowing through some other stuff real quick here. More Black Crowes. Pantera. A vulgar display of power. I mean, Pantera's albums around this period of time were just incredible. What can you say? Faith No More, The Prodigy. I mean, how many more? Arrested Development. You guys all remember Arrested Development. I mean, one after the other, just killer bands. Now, here's another one that had really breeded some incredible music, and this would be Caius, Blues for the Red Sun. Now, my favorite album by Caius was From Sky Valley. I think that's what it's called. And I mean, if you haven't listened to that album, if you're into like really heavy, hard driving, just sludgy rock, it's freaking awesome. But this was the album before it, Caius, Blues from the Red Sun. And why is Caius important? Because Caius ultimately became Queens of the Stone Age and Queens of the Stone, or at least Josh Homme became, started Queens of the Stone Age. And so this is like the beginning of that whole era of music that kind of kicked in, started in the later 90s. And it's just, again, another amazing band, starting early in the 90s. Sublime, 40 Ounces to Freedom, Megadeth in there, White Zombie. Now, not all of these bands are going to have the same type of presence today, but, like when you think about how much came out within that 2 or 3 year period of time, it's just unbelievable. Ice Cube, The Predator, Body Count, Blind Melon, Sonic Youth, Dirty. It's just like, it just goes on. Sugar, Copper Blue. I love that album. Stone Temple Pilots. Here we go. I'm probably going to end on Stone Temple Pilots. Recently, I was over at Digital Dealer, and during lunch, I met a couple of really cool dudes, both musicians, guys in the car business now, but both musicians. One had played in a band in the early 90s in LA. Yeah, LA. His band was Black Market Flowers. I'd never heard him before, but I've been checking him out since. Really cool stuff. And another guy I was talking to, big Stone Temple Pilot fan. In fact, so much so that he actually auditioned to replace Scott Weiland in the band. So here we go. Album 51, according to this year, is the Stone Temple Pilots. Here we have another powerhouse band. Now, I for some reason, I always liked the Stone Temple Pilots, but only recently have I gone back and really started listening to their stuff. And watching some of their live performances. Freaking great band. Really great musicianship, killer drummer. Robert DeLeo, the bass player, is a really phenomenal bass player, and Dean DeLeo, the guitar player, I didn't realize how much I overlooked him as a player. This guy is freaking solid. He's got the Jimmy Page stuff. He's got like the 70s glam and kind of trashy stuff. He's got a little bit of that metal heaviness thrown into his playing. When you really start listening to Stone Temple Pilots and some of their, many hit songs, they're really well written and super cool songs. And watching some of their live performances, particularly the ones in the early 2000s when Scott was still alive, I mean, they sound great. Scott's voice sounds great. The band is playing great. I mean, and so, here we go. Like within 2 years, you got Public Enemy, you got Tribe Called Quest, you got Dr. Dre, you got Nirvana, you got Pearl Jam, you got Soundgarden, you got Stone Temple Pilots. I mean, you got Metallica, you got the Red Hot Chili Peppers. To say that 90s rock is somehow anything other than freaking incredible, and I realized I said rock and I just talked about a bunch of hip-hop bands. So, oh well, whatever, who cares? It's just like, it's phenomenal when you look at the quality of music that hit the scene in the early 90s. The next year you start talking about Tool and Lenny Kravitz, and it's just, the list just goes on and on and on. So I think I'm probably going to just kind of time out there for a second, because I'm rambling. There's no doubt about it. Don't know how many of you will actually hang in here till the end with me on this. But, I love music. I love guitar-driven rock. I love hip-hop, older hip-hop. I mean, I guess, I'm dating yourself. You get to a certain age, and there's certain music that you really just identify with. And the funny thing is I've gotten older, I didn't realize that how much this music is actually part of my, my inner soul. And going back and really listening to it a lot lately, and going through these lists just reminds me how fortunate I am and how thankful I am to have been alive to go through and be part of this music and see it all. And see, almost every one of these bands I saw live multiple times. Haven't so much in the last few years. I'd like to see them again. But really, really great music. Does it mean that this is the only, era of music that I think is great? No. Would I love to see other bands? Of course, to be able to see Zeppelin or the Stones or the Beatles or any one of them in a prime, or Hendrix. Of course. Who wouldn't? But really, really, really cool second wave of incredible rock and roll, supplemented by alternative and hip hop in the early 90s. So, yeah, check it out, man. Check it out, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't jumped back into your roots and listened to some of this music from the 90s, if you grew up and went through that period of time, get back in there. Feel some of those feelings, get moving again with some of this stuff, because it's really cool. I can't say enough about it. It stimulated me to want to add a whole bunch more songs to my band's set list. I've already got like 3 or 4 that I'm working on right now. And so, 90s rock. Best album of the early 90s for episode number 90 here on deck with me. That's right, Chris Herman. Friday, May 13th is when we're recording this. It's Friday the 13th. Woo! Oh, may we all make it through the day. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. We'll see you later. Okay, bye-bye.